Welcome back to What You Will Learn. My name is Adam Ashton.
And my name is Adam Jones. Today we're taking you through the best bits of How Will You Measure Your Life by the powerful trio Clayton, Christensen, Karen Dillon and James Allworth. Finding fulfilment using lessons from some of the world's greatest businesses.
Clayton Christensen tells a story of how he had finished his Harvard MBA in 1979 and 5 years later had his 5-year reunion. He was looking around the room. Everyone was looking pretty sharp, pretty dapper, pretty polished, pretty well-groomed, and they were just all had a lot of things to celebrate. They were doing extremely well. They'd come out of Harvard's MBA program as, some of the brightest talents available. They were all killing it with great jobs. Some were working in exotic locations. A lot of them had also managed to marry great spouses who were also killing it in their realm as well. And everybody just seemed to be just having the absolutely fantastic life on every level. Well, as they seem to do
pretty good
at reunions.
Some people probably putting it on a bit.
Yeah.
Like I think I told you I had a mate who was a year level above me. He hired a Lamborghini for the 10-year, not a Lamb, it was a Ferrari, sorry, salt and pepper there, but just revving the Ferrari at the front and came out with a Ferrari hat like he was killing it. Some people do a bit of that, but a bit different 10 years into it because the 10-year reunion, there was a new trend that was sort of starting to take place. A number of the classmates that Clay was looking forward to catching up and having a beer with didn't even rock up to the 10-year reunion because he got on the phone during the week and tried to find out why. Turned out they were doing very, very well in their careers and it was somewhat all-consuming. They were becoming executives in firms like McKinsey & Co. and Goldman Sachs. Some were successful entrepreneurs already. Some were filling successful spots in the companies of Fortune 500 companies. So their careers were killing it, and I guess that's why they weren't at the reunions.
And as the reunions every 5 years got on and on and on, things seemed to get a little bit worse and worse and worse. On one hand, professionally, whilst these people, they were the brightest people that Clayton had ever met, they were also the most decent people he'd ever met. They were killing it in their professional lives, but their personal lives, something seemed to be missing. Some of those awesome marriages were no longer so awesome and probably had come to an end. Even one bloke found himself in jail, the ex-CEO of Enron, who was in his class. So whilst professionally people were doing so well, they kind of missed out on the personal elements.
So essentially, one of the big traps that people end up in is having that all-consuming career where it takes all your focus and all your resources, but in doing so, a lot of your personal lives sort of turn to shit. And understanding what causes these problems and what are the lures of some of these traps of what happened to his classmates and what can happen to all of us means that we can plan our path forward and plan where we want our journey to be ending up in the next decades to come.
A few questions you've got to ask yourself. How can I be sure that I'll be successful and happy in my career? How can I be sure that my relationships with my spouse, my children, my extended family, my close friends are going to become enduring sources of happiness? How can I be sure that I can live a life of integrity and stay out of jail? They're pretty simple questions. The problem is almost nobody ever asks themselves these. When you were 10 years old and someone asked you what you wanted to be when you grew up, anything seemed possible. An astronaut, an archaeologist, a firefighter, a professional sports player. Your answers were kind of guided simply by what you thought would make you happy, and there were no limits.
And out of the population, of course, there's going to be a couple of people or a certain percentage who never lose sight of aspiring to do something what's meaningful. I mean, as you get a bit older, it's not all about being a firefighter or baseball player, but I guess that search for meaning is something that, people stick to for their whole lives, and some of us find it. However, a good majority of us, we let the years go by allowing our dreams of finding that awesome career, which is fully meaningful, let it be peeled away. And we sort of begin to accept it's not realistic, in parentheses there, to do something that you actually truly love for a living. I mean, that's not a possible dream, it's a pipe dream.
Yeah, it's important to at least start to think about that. Think about the things that are going to motivate you in your career. And there's an important distinction of what things can motivate you. One is what he calls hygiene factors. So the hygiene factors, they're the things like status, compensation, job security, work conditions, company policies, and supervisory practices. Like these are kind of like the basic entry level. These are sort of pass or fail. It's important that you have a manager that doesn't manipulate and bully you. Like you need to tick that box. But at the same time, once you've ticked that box, doubling the salary doesn't really double your happiness. Or you're not suddenly going to, if you have this massive status increase, you're not suddenly going to love a job that you used to hate.
Yeah, at the very best, you're not going to hate it anymore. Yeah. I mean, you probably will hate your job if you're getting paid shit, or if you're unsafe, or if you're getting micromanaged, or your company policies make everything just a disaster, you're not going to hate it. But once those things are removed, all right, we're done with that. We can move on. We're basically getting to that entry level, what you need for a successful career.
So that's just the tick or cross. You need to tick all those boxes. But beyond that, the things that really motivate you are going to be things outside of that realm. That's things like challenging work, recognition, responsibility, personal growth. Like the feeling that you're making a meaningful contribution, they come from inside yourself. They're the intrinsic conditions. It's not about the job itself. It's not about what's written on the job description, or it's not about what's getting put into your bank account every pay week. It's really about the things coming from intrinsically.
So these motivators are the things that are going to love your jobs. Quite different to the hygiene factors that is the entry-level benchmark to not hate your job. So many of us in our careers, what we do actually, and where we could make a mistake, is choosing and prioritizing for hygiene factors as our primary criteria that we're going for. Like the classic one out of that is cash, making as much money as you can. Again, there's been plenty of research to show that there is diminishing returns on that, to a point where as soon as you get to the level of hygiene factor where you've got a comfortable level of income just to get by, beyond that doesn't really mean much, because the things that do mean much are those motivators, like you said, Ashto: recognition, responsibility, personal growth, these intrinsic things.
There's that old saying, you find a job you love and you'll never work a day in your life. Just one of those nice things that gets put on the quote cards on Instagram, or maybe just like on the calendar, you'll see it written at the bottom somewhere and you think, oh, that's a nice thing to aim for. But kind of what the hell does that really mean? How do you actually do that?
It's a bit of a pipe dream for a lot of people. If you think about it, like how many times do we step back and think, all right, how are we going to approach our career? How are we going to actually optimize it just so we're getting the most out of it? I mean, how much time is in it? 40 or 50 hours a week. What's that as a percentage, Ashto?
Well, I think the stat is like it's 80,000 hours of your life is working.
Yeah, well, that's a good chunk of it. Think about you're going to cark it one day, and then you might as well make that to be as good possible, and even more so than that, taking a step back to actually strategizing to make the most out of that 80,000 hours. So
to get a bit of a taste of strategy, let's go with a bit of a story. We'll go with Honda. When Honda first popped into the American market in the 1960s, Honda's management thought, you know what, the US, there's a fair few people over there that seem to be doing pretty well. They've all got a bit of money, a bit of cash to splash around. So let's head over and try to crack that market. The US at the time, the motorbike market was dominated by Harley and Triumph, the big Harley Davidsons, the big chubby dudes with handlebar moustaches. Rolling around. Actually, I probably don't want to say too many bad things about bikies, but they were dominating it. And the Honda's plan was to just pop in there and just take a little slice of the action. So they thought, all right, we're going to take just 10% of the market from the Europeans. But this goal, which was relatively a big goal to just go in there and just take over, it almost killed Honda, because their motorcycle was a bit like a poor man's bicycle, they're saying. So the large cycles didn't really work, and their whole entire their purpose and what they went over to do, it didn't really work out. However, something else sort of happened, which made Honda successful in this market. What they did was, in the shipments of the big bikes they were trying to compete with, the Harleys, they'd also just sent over a few of their little bikes as well. The little bikes known as the Super Cubs in Japan, they were used for delivery bikes, just to zip around the busy urban streets. But people thought, oh, no one's actually going to want to ride these other than the Japanese delivery drivers. But then one of the employees thought, okay, I'm just going to jump on and run a few errands around town. And they thought, well, that's all it's ever going to be used for. There's nothing really in this aside from just darting around from place to place. Then on the weekends, this bloke started to take it out with taking out off-road journeying with people. And then his mates came, and then they thought, this is pretty perfect bike to actually go off-road on the weekends and go, camping and all that. Then from there, the word of mouth took over, and this thing that just started off as just a silly little thing to do on weekends ended up being Honda's entry into the market. And this is something they could not possibly anticipate at the very start, that these off-road trips on the weekend will be the catalyst for them to take over the market. And of course, the rest is history, because they started there with this very small, tiny slice of the market, well below 10%. But from there, this opportunity allowed Honda to grow into the business that we know today. That's right. You're never going to take your big, heavy, shiny, fancy, expensive Harley that looks really nice. You're never going to take that jumping over hills. But this little tiny piece of shit supercar, then you can really thrash it around, darting back and forth, up and down sand dunes. It seems like a lot of fun. It was a completely new industry that they hadn't really planned for. It just kind of happened, or you might say just kind of emerged.
Yeah. Well done there, Ashto, because they're the two different strategies that we can take in business, just like the two different strategies that we can take into our career. The first way, which I guess Honda initially went in there, was with a deliberate strategy. This is where we anticipate what the problems and the opportunities are. We know exactly what's going to happen, so we make a deliberate plan about what we're going to do with our career, and we sort of stick to it as best we can. Maybe make little tweaks and pivots here, but in essence, we have a deliberate plan and we stick to it.
The other approach is the emergent strategy. That's when some unanticipated problem or an unanticipated opportunity pops up, and you adapt accordingly. And you think, okay, well, here's this little thing over here. This emergent strategy might pop up. That's when Honda, it popped up that people enjoyed going around on the weekend through the jungle and up and down hills and stuff on these tiny little bikes. I thought, maybe there's something to this. And so their deliberate strategy got replaced with this emergent strategy.
So there's a few things we can learn from this Honda story here. I mean, if Honda is a bit like your career, you can come in and know exactly what you do in 10 years, like Honda did originally. But Honda sort of tweaked and tinkered with things on the little sides on the weekends, and before they knew it, their whole strategy changed from something that emerged out of nothing. Now, for your career, it can take that same trajectory as well, because what you play with and do, little things on the sides and trying new things and tweaking new things, before you know it, that could end up being your whole career change. And, what is once your emergent strategy becomes into a deliberate strategy.
Often at the start, people think that they have to have this deliberate strategy. Everyone's asking, what do you want to do when you grow up? So the kid thinks, okay, well, I've got to have a bit of a plan here. You turn 15, 16, you're approaching the end of high school. You've got to know, okay, well, what job do I want? What university course do I want to study? What sort of path do I want to take? You think it has to be all mapped out. Your study has to be mapped out. Your career progression, climbing the ladder has to be mapped out. There's a lot of pressure there to have this perfect, deliberate strategy that lines up all the way to you becoming the top dog at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And you probably find out that at the very start, due to external pressures, they're probably full of hygiene factors. Remember, what we're looking for is both hygiene factors and motivators. Now, if you got those two things already in your career, I mean, it's a pretty bloody good career. They're the two things that you need to have a successful, happy, and meaningful career, and you're probably going to get paid pretty well for it as well. This is what you got, then probably a deliberate approach makes the most sense, because you've found something that not everybody gets to experience in their careers. But very different story. If you haven't found both of those things yet, then perhaps an emergent strategy is still the key.
That's right. If you haven't worked out exactly what it is that lights you up, and if you haven't got to the place where you've got a great job that ticks all the boxes and motivates you as well, then you're going to have to be on the lookout. That's where the emergent strategy, you're going to have to look up for the things that pop up that you can take advantage of. Often people can get caught in the trap of going straight for the hygiene factors only. If you think about it, you've got this big student debt that's piling up. Maybe you've got a partner, maybe you've got kids, maybe you've got a dog that you've got to look after, and you think, okay, well, I'm going to have to take this job just for a year or two just so I can get on top of my finances. All of a sudden, like, okay, well, I'm getting a nice pay packet here. I've just got a promotion. I'm getting more money. I'll just do it for another year. Then I'll start to find something I want. The problem is you keep kind of pushing these other things down the list and you get stuck in the hygiene factors only. What we need to do if we find ourselves caught in that is remember the emergent strategy. Remember that there is something that you want to head towards. You want to head towards the point where you're ticking the boxes, the hygiene factors, but also maximizing the motivation. In order to do that, you probably just got to, just pull up a bit, just take a bit of a breather, look at the path that you're heading down, look at your current deliberate strategy and think, okay, maybe can I look to the left or look to the right and see what other things might emerge that can actually get me closer to my end goal. I think most people don't think about it, do they? They just kind of get stuck in I'll just keep doing this, I'll just keep doing this. There's no planning, there's no strategy, there's no thinking about what's the next step going to be.
The book uses business metaphors really about how we can make decisions in our life. And of course, from a business point of view, there's different ways we can make investments into different strategies that become our lives. So think about, we've got resources firstly. We've got the time, energy, our talent, and our wealth. And we use these resources to put them into several businesses or processes in our personal life. I mean, you might choose to have a rewarding relationship with your spouse or significant other. You might choose to put all your resources to succeed in your career or raise great children or contribute to the community, or just, sit on the couch and watch Netflix. Whatever you basically spend your resources on is what your lives ends up being.
And unfortunately, as with pretty much everything, resources, they're finite and they're limited, but the potential opportunities are seemingly unlimited. The things that we want to do seem to just go on forever. But of course, we need to be a little bit intentional and a little bit strategic about how we invest those resources in those different business opportunities that pop up. Business opportunities, of course, being the things you listed.
That's it. The danger of higher achieving people, though, is that unconsciously you'll allocate your resources to activities that yield the most tangible, immediate sort of accomplishments. A lot of the time, it isn't going to be taking your kid to the baseball or the soccer. That's not going to give you a big, immediate achievement for a lot of people. But for some of it might be like shipping a product, finishing a design, helping a patient, closing a sale, teaching a class, winning a case, publishing a paper. These are the sort of things that seem to grab most of the high achievers' attention in their career, especially the ones in the Clay from his older 10 to 20 year high school reunions.
As with most things, we tend to overweight our investment towards the things that give us a clear, tangible, short-term reward. So you work really hard to get a raise or get a bonus or get a promotion. But then there's the other things that it's not so clear and it's much more longer term and you're not sure if your investment's going to pay off. Things like developing relationships with a significant other, raising good children, maintaining your personal friendships. These things, they're not quite so clear and the returns are kind of way off into the distance. So they kind of get forgotten about. If you're not intentional, you just think, oh, it's okay if I cancel that dinner with my mates and I go work overtime instead. Or if you think, we had this family holiday plan, but there's this big opportunity. We're about to make a big acquisition at work. I'm going to have to cancel the family holiday. The kids, they'll understand because I'll get a big bonus at the end and I can share that with them later.
Yeah, you're doing it for the family the whole way through, aren't you? You're doing it for them.
That's what you say anyway.
That's what you're telling yourself. And it can be all too easy to have this default as your approach. As an example here of a bloke called Steve, must be mate to Clay, he said that he'd always wanted to own and operate his own business because he'd always had opportunities to work for someone else and learn from someone else in his profession. And he wanted to attract the compensation to be his own boss. And it's been his whole dream. So in order to fulfill this dream, it meant long hours at work to build his own firm. Now, his family and friends were understanding. I mean, it was his dream. He's got finite time on the planet. No one else was going to do it for him. And it was on him to really provide for his family by making these decisions.
Yeah, and it kind of makes sense. Your mates will say, yeah, that's all right, mate. Go for it. Steve's wife says, that's okay, Steve. Oh, yeah, you can work. I'll look after the kids tonight. There's an unfortunate twist coming here because his company killed it. But the problem was, just as his company was taken off, his marriage fell apart. When he needed the support of his siblings, his friends, they were, again, the old cats in the cradle, they were probably a bit too busy because he'd neglected them. He didn't really have that social capital with them to lean on. He'd been putting all his time, all his resources into building this company, which was killing it, but he hadn't invested in all those other things.
Yeah, out of all the allocation of resources, he invested purely in this business, which is, he says he's did it as a roundabout way for everyone else. So the company was killing it because that's where his resources went. But as you said there, Ashto, the social capital kind of dropped through the floor and he ended up obviously moving out of his home and he was super successful. He had a beautiful home and everything like that. But he only got to see his kids every couple of weeks. They had to leave their friends in their home and move in with their dad with some sort of Spartan apartment, which was amazing. They'd go out for dinner. They'd go and see a movie, but it soon lost its charm seeing the dad every 2 weeks. And so from the very start, he had a fun, loving family who was probably comfortable in their income. Steve, he ended up loaded and rich without a family.
That's right.
What's out of those two, what's a better decision? Yeah, Clay, bit of a rhetorical question with the title of the book. How will you measure your life?
Yeah.
Steve measured it by one thing, but probably cooked it.
Well, that's probably the thing. If Steve says, you know what, my goal, I just want to become as rich as possible, make a shitload of money, have a massive company. If that was how he measured his life, that's a big tick. But Steve was saying, you know what, I want to build this company so that I can have free time to then play with my kids, that I can make a lot of money so I can take them on a nice fancy family holiday. I can buy them all the cool gadgets and stuff. So he's measuring his life by having actually a tight-knit family unit. The problem was the strategy that he employed to get to that end goal actually kind of kill that end goal in the first place. You could have realized if your goal is to have a tight-knit family, maybe you should invest a few resources into your family.
Yeah.
Not thinking just I'll invest all in business and then later I'll come back and look after the family.
Well, that's just asking that question. I mean, he probably didn't ask that question. How will you measure your life sort of from the end in, beginning from the end in mind? Probably from that perspective, you would say, all right, I want a family. I want my kids to, at least not hate me. So if you had that all together from the start, your probably allocation of resources would be a little bit different because there's so much more to life than your career. I mean, the person you are at work and the amount of time you spend there, at the end of the day, it is going to impact the person you are outside of work and the relationships you have outside of work as well. So high achievers focus a great deal on just only on the work part of the equation and not the other part.
That brings to mind something that used to come up all the time on the podcast. Doesn't come up for a while. The old Mexican fisherman. The Mexican fisherman is sitting back, chilling, probably sipping on a beer, and then the American tourist comes over and says, "Oh, what's going on here? You're killing it. You could make this massive company." But then by the end of I think everyone knows the Mexican fisherman story, yeah. By the end, it plays out. He's like, you can sell this massive company, make a shitload of money, then you can just sit back and drink beer and smoke ciggies and fish for fish, and you'll be happy. He's like, man, I'm already doing it. So you got to think about what's the end goal and what's going to get you to that end goal.
Well, that's perfect. It links very well because, like at the very start, I'm going to go and build this awesome business just so my family loves me. We can spend time together and be free from everything. And then they go off and start a business and everything like that. And at the very start, the whole point of that story is, all right, you've already got that fun-loving family. You just need to spend the resources on that.
Yeah, I think the big trap that everybody falls into is what Clayton says, sequencing of life investments. You think, this period of my life, this is all about building my career. So for 10 years, I'm going to work really, really hard on my career. And then after that, my career will be settled. Then I can spend the next 20 years working really, really hard on my personal relationships. It doesn't work like that. You got to be doing both at the same time. If you get to the point of you might work really hard for 10 years and then say, cool, I'll call up my mates to go and play around a golf. All of a sudden, they're not taking your phone calls because you haven't spoken to them for 10 years.
Wishing for a certain type of family and having a certain family, very two different things. Like we've been saying, there is an opportunity to step back and actually try and design the type of family life that we want. And of course, a big part of that is how we are as parents.
As parents, it says we, I don't know if we, but parents in general, they share a common worry that one day their children are going to be faced with a tough decision. The problem is the parents aren't going to be there to help them decide. Maybe they're going to get on a plane and go traveling around the world and they're going to be in a far-flung country where the parent can't tell them what's right and what's wrong. Or maybe they are in college, they've got an exam, they've got an opportunity to cheat on the test to bump up their marks. Maybe they're going to face a decision whether to choose to be kind to a complete stranger or to give them a slap in the face, metaphorically. They're all the things that your children are going to face, and you're not going to be there to help them make the decisions.
It's very much like a company. If you're an employee, someone under you, there's going to be times when they're out on their own and you're not able to micromanage. And the thing that's going to actually guide them in making the best decisions is, of course, culture, because culture is like the common goals that you might have a company, but also as a family that make you successful. And if it's formed properly, people are going to autonomously do what they need to do, and they know what the values are to make things successful, because a culture is a unique combination of processes and priorities. And if your kids have got these things, I mean, next time they're in Egypt and they're offered a cocaine to go on a bender with the chariot riders, they might decline and do a flat no, or they might say yes and be better off for it.
I don't know which was the correct decision there. But it probably sounds a bit weird to say, oh, yeah, we're building our family culture. But it's also like companies. I think the companies who talk about building company culture don't build a good culture.
They build the wankiest ones, I reckon.
Definitely. It's the unspoken, the unwritten rules, the culture that doesn't need to be talked about is what we're talking about here. That a family, much like as a successful company, you can create a family culture that then is that underlying, those core values that then dictate the decisions.
So parents have a big job here to build that culture in their family, or have a culture that's non-existent, because there's always going to be a desire to really overshadow the child in developing their processes. And if you do so, you might feel good as a parent, but if you're overshadowing too much and micromanaging, then the child's probably not going to be able to make their own decisions.
Yeah, a parent often thinks that it's their job to develop the child, but there's probably a different meta job here, and it's really allowing your child to develop the skill to develop better skills, if that makes sense. So it's not your job to go out there and develop all of your kids' skills. The most important thing for you to do is develop within them the ability to develop their own skills. How can you give them the knowledge that allows them to develop deeper knowledge? How can you give them experiences to help them learn from their own experiences? So it's all really about not doing it for them, but just kind of clearing the path and building the meta skills that allow them to then develop on their own.
There's different schools of experience here, because if you're going to let your child develop on their own and they're, got the school project and in year 3 and they're trying to make origami out of paper and they just pulled out a piece and you just know it looks horrible and they're going to bring it to school next day and get laughed at. I mean, you could just go out and make it your own for them, go, hey, take this to school, Jimmy. You're going to get a pat on the back from the teacher. Or you can let them go out there and fail and stuff up and actually learn from the school of life, because that is what life is about. But from a young age, many of our children who participate in sports and do these sorts of things, we're giving them medals and trophies and ribbons at the end of the season just for participating, even if they suck. Because at the end of the day, they're probably going to suck at something, and sooner or later they're going to find out. So learning from the school of life is actually letting the universe actually poke and prod them and learn from experience.
That's right. There's that version of the origami in year 3. Maybe as they progress through school, maybe they get to year 8 or year 9, things start getting a little bit more serious. All of a sudden, they've got a big essay that's due that makes up a big chunk of their semester's grades. And sitting around the dinner table one night, your kid announces that this big essay, it's due the next day. It's a massive part of my grade, but I haven't started it yet. There's going to be a little bit of panic around the table. And there's going to be a few things that flash through your mind. The parent might say, don't worry, little Jimmy, I'll do it for you. At least you can get a good night's sleep. You can rest up for whatever problems are going to happen. You're going to get a good grade because I'm much better than you are. So your piece of shit essay that you would have got a 4 out of 10, I'm going to get a 12 out of 10. And you might think that's my job as a parent, is to help my kid get the best grades they possibly can. That's wrong. That's very bad.
Well, how do you think, what's going to happen next time your child is laid on a project?
Yeah, or even next time they get given a project, they know exactly what to do. Do nothing. Night before, say, parent, help me out here. Bang, 100%.
That's it. Well, the braver decision here is for sort of let the child have a more difficult but more valuable course in life. And that is allow the child to see the consequences of neglecting that important assignment. All right, next time it happens that night it happens, either they're going to have to stay up on their own and pull it off somehow and just see what happens, or they fail to complete it and they get an F the next day and they get laughed at by the teacher. And it might be painful for you as a parent watching your child fail, and next time you catch up with the other parents for coffee and you're all measuring your kid's success, you're just saying how much Jimmy sucks at school. That's not going to be fun either.
It's going to be tough short term, but it's going to be much better long term. They're going to learn from that mistake. They're going to learn that, okay, next time I'm going to have to get started earlier, or they're going to learn that, you know what, I better get prepared and I better do the right things here, or whatever it is. They're actually going to learn for themselves rather than you just serving up on a silver platter a perfect 10 out of 10 essay.
Mate, after reading this book, I went on a family holiday with my brother and my sister-in-law, and went away with Ruby. So Ruby's like 4 years old, and morning one I went on, raced her, and I lost. But I knew this book, I can't just keep her.
What do you mean you lost in a race?
Deliberately let her lose. I let her win. And she always wins. The next day though, I ran. I let her think she was going to win, and I kicked her ass. I just came home strong, and then her face at me, I've never seen anything like it. She was just greasing me for hours and hours and hours. But that was a school of life.
That's good though. That's good. Imagine if she went through her whole life thinking that she can beat anybody that she races against.
Well, sooner or later, she's not going to be able to.
It's
Either.
going to come crashing
She's going to have
down.
to work harder.
I know Gary Vaynerchuk, one of your favorite people, talks about how he never lets his kids beat him at basketball or chess or anything. He always demolishes them. He's doing slam dunks over his 11-year-old daughter's head and stuff like that. So
It's a bit too far from the G-man. But it's one of those things we should consciously think about what abilities we want our child to develop and what experiences are going to actually get them there.
Better loop back to the title, How Will You Measure Your Life? That's really the book in a nutshell, isn't it? That you got to work out what metrics are you going to optimize for. If you don't intentionally choose what you're going to measure your life by, you're going to find that you're going to be probably shooting for the wrong types of goals. You're going to go for the short-term shiny objects rather than building the long-term true satisfaction.
In the long run, clarity about your own purpose is going to really trump the knowledge of knowing you've put money in the bank account or anything like that. If you take the time to look back on it, take a step back and ask yourself these questions, it's probably going to be the most important thing that you'll ever do and find the most important things you've ever learned.